Imagine you have the constitutional right to vote, yet show up to the polls missing the proper identification. You are turned away, your 15th Amendment right is ignored. Today, this is happening to many Americans who simply just want to exercise their right to vote and partake in the democratic process. With general elections coming up this November, this will not only continue to affect the individual voter, but the country as a whole. With this being said, voter identification should not be required at the polls. Now, I invite you to consider and further understand the key reasons why this is true. To start off, voter identification laws are inherently discriminatory and suppress minority voters. First, many more minority voters lack the proper identification than white voters. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, nationally up to 25% of African American citizens of voting age lack government-issued photo ID, compared to only 8% of whites. Adding on to this, voter identification laws reduce the voter turnout among minority voters as well. According to the Caltech MIT Voting Technology Project, studies suggest that the effect of eligible citizens not voting increases for minority voters to as much as 5.7% for blacks, as much as 10% for Hispanics, and 8.5% for Asians. Now, poll workers also have the ability to decide to whom they ask for voter identification, which also can lead to discrimination. To continue, the proper voter identification is very hard to obtain. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, as many as 11% of United States citizens, more than 21 million individuals, do not have government-issued photo identification. Identification costs money, and even with government-provided identification, extra costs and fees are bound to occur. Many documents require you have your birth certificate before obtaining those documents. However, it costs money in order to obtain your birth certificate. According to the Richard Sobel with the Charles Hamilton Houston Institution for Race and Justice at the Harvard Law School, the combined cost of document fees, travel expenses, and waiting time are estimated to range from $75 to $175. In addition to this, it is an added hassle of obtaining proper identification, and is a burden for people with disabilities, the elderly, and people who live in rural areas. Furthermore, voter identification laws can lead to misrepresentation. As stated earlier, large proportions of the eligible voting body of the United States are being denied the right to vote, which therefore leads to misrepresentation not only within our own government, but within our own government. Large proportions of minorities are being misrepresented. Since the large proportion of minorities who are being denied the right to vote based off voter identification laws, they are also being misrepresented in the vote. Most people that are in favor of voter identification tend to be Republican. According to conservative U.S. Circuit Court Judge Richard Posner, there's only one motivation for imposing burdens on voting that are ostensibly designed to discourage voter impersonation fraud, and that is to discourage voting by persons likely to vote against the party responsible for imposing the burdens. With that being said, while these points and stats one can see the problem with voter identification laws, and personal accounts like Gladys Harris and Caitlin Tyndall add an extra perspective as to why they should not exist. First off, 66-year-old Gladys Harris, who under Wisconsin law is required to present a photo ID in order to vote, brought her Medicare and Social Security cards as well as her county-issued bus pass, which displayed her photo with her to the polls in 2016. However, she turned away because her 3 government-issued identification documents did not meet the criteria of said Wisconsin law. Also, hoping to vote in the state of Wisconsin, 24-year-old Caitlin Tyndall intended to vote with her Ohio State-issued ID, copies of her lease and utility bills, and her student ID from Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. However, due to Wisconsin law, none of these pieces of identification were acceptable, and Caitlin never made it to the polls to vote. To wrap things up, voter ID should not be required at the polls. Voter ID laws are discriminatory, suppress minority voters, are hard to obtain, and lead to misrepresentation in our government. Through these points, it is evident that where the real stasis lies in this issue. The enduring racial gap in the United States